Settle into the sleepy mind channel. Tonight, we will travel across one of the longest and most fascinating trade networks in human history. No single traveler truly saw all of it at once. A slow-moving web of deserts, mountains, valleys, and distant cities stretching across enormous portions of Asia and beyond. For centuries, goods moved quietly through heat, cold, wind, and silence. Silk, spices, metal, paper, and countless other materials crossed regions separated by thousands of miles. Ideas moved as well. Languages, inventions, beliefs, and stories traveled alongside caravans, walking steadily beneath open skies. If you enjoy calm journeys through history and science, feel free to like and subscribe. Check out the playlist for many other fascinating topics and continuous play. More videos are posted weekly. Let us begin. Many people imagine the Silk Road as one long road across the continent. In reality, it was far more complicated. The Silk Road was not a single road at all. It was a network of connected trade routes that slowly developed over long periods of time. Some paths crossed dry desert basins, while others climbed narrow mountain passes or curved around rivers and grasslands. Some sections grew busy or quiet, depending on weather, safety, and political conditions. The network behaved almost like a living system, constantly shifting and adapting to the world around it. The scale can feel difficult to imagine because modern transportation compresses distance so dramatically. A flight crossing continents may now take only hours. Along the Silk Road, travel remained slow across weeks, months, and sometimes years. Goods passed from one caravan to another through countless settlements spread across the landscape. A bolt of silk might begin its journey in Eastern Asia and slowly travel westward across deserts, mountains, and trading cities before finally reaching distant markets thousands of miles away. The material moved quietly through many hands, languages, and environments. Distance shaped nearly every part of the Silk Road experience. Travelers could not simply rush across these enormous regions. Geography controlled movement constantly. A desert with little water demanded caution, while mountain routes forced caravans through steep, narrow terrain. Certain regions allowed faster progress, while others slowed movement dramatically. Even weather changed the rhythm of travel. Wind, snow, heat, and seasonal conditions influenced when caravans moved and which paths were safest to follow. In many ways, the Silk Road functioned more like the circulation system of a giant living world than a single road. Modern highways carry vehicles quickly between cities through paved lanes and organized traffic systems. The Silk Road moved at a completely different pace. Information, materials, and travelers flowed gradually across connected routes, like water, slowly moving through branching rivers. Some areas became major centers of exchange, while smaller settlements became quiet resting points between difficult stretches. The landscapes themselves shaped the identity of the route. Enormous deserts stretched across parts of Central Asia, where water could become dangerously scarce. Mountain ranges rose into cold, high elevations, where narrow passes forced caravans into difficult paths through rock and snow. Wide plains opened across grasslands, where movement became easier and visibility stretched toward distant horizons. Geography was never simply background scenery along the Silk Road. The land actively controlled how movement happened. Travel required careful planning because mistakes could become dangerous quickly. Caravans needed supplies, water, food, and animals capable of enduring difficult conditions over long distances. Travelers studied routes and relied on local knowledge passed through generations. Certain paths became trusted because they connected reliable water sources and safer resting points across otherwise harsh terrain. Preparation mattered because the journey could not be separated from the environment. Movement along the Silk Road often happened gradually in stages rather than through one enormous uninterrupted journey. A caravan might travel only part of the network before goods transferred to new groups continuing farther onward. This created an ongoing chain of movement stretching across continents. In a way, the Silk Road resembled a relay race unfolding over vast stretches of geography and time. One group carried materials across a difficult section, before another continued the journey through completely different terrain and conditions. Trade connected distant regions that otherwise might never interact directly. A person living near the Mediterranean coast could eventually wear silk produced thousands of miles away in Asia without ever meeting the people who originally created it. Spices, textiles, and crafted goods traveled long distances while carrying pieces of distant cultures alongside them. The Silk Road, therefore, became more than a system for moving objects. It slowly connected human societies, separated by geography, language, and climate. The name Silk Road itself comes from one of the most famous materials moving along these routes. Silk became highly valued because it was lightweight, smooth, and surprisingly strong, despite its delicate appearance. Yet silk represented only one small part of a much larger network of exchange. Countless goods moved steadily across these routes over long periods of time, while geography, distance, and human endurance shaped every stage of the process. There is something calming about imagining the slow rhythm of movement along the Silk Road. Long lines of travelers crossing open landscapes beneath changing skies, footsteps pressing quietly into sand and stone, animals carrying carefully packed supplies across long distances, distant settlements appearing slowly on the horizon after days of difficult travel. The journey unfolded gradually through patience, preparation, and constant adaptation to the natural world. The Silk Road became one of history's great systems of connection, not because movement was fast or easy, but because people continued traveling despite the enormous challenges created by distance and geography. Across deserts, mountains, and endless stretches of land, goods and ideas moved steadily between distant regions for centuries. The network expanded gradually through repeated human movement until it connected large portions of the ancient world through steady exchange across the landscapes of Asia and beyond. The Silk Road crossed some of the most varied landscapes on Earth. A traveler moving along these routes might begin in fertile valleys filled with farms and rivers, then slowly enter dry open plains stretching toward distant horizons. Weeks later, the same journey could pass into rocky mountain terrain where cold winds moved across steep, narrow paths high above the valleys below. Beyond those mountains, enormous deserts waited with heat shimmering above endless sand and stone. Geography constantly changed the experience of travel, and every region demanded different forms of preparation, patience, and endurance. Deserts became some of the most difficult sections of the Silk Road because water was often scarce and distances between reliable sources could be enormous. Travelers needed careful planning long before the journey began. Water had to be measured while animals needed food and rest for harsh conditions. A caravan could not simply wander into the desert and hope to succeed. Survival depended heavily on route knowledge passed carefully between experienced travelers over long periods of time. Modern travel can make it easy to underestimate how deeply landscapes once controlled movement. Today, highways cut through mountains, while aircraft cross deserts in only hours. Along the Silk Road, geography remained fully in control. A mountain range could force travelers through one narrow pass, while a dangerous desert region might push caravans toward longer but safer routes containing reliable water sources. Often, the land itself decided where movement could happen. The Great Plains created different experiences from the mountains and deserts. Wide open grasslands often allowed easier movement because caravans could travel farther without climbing steep terrain or searching constantly for narrow passages. Visibility stretched across long distances beneath open skies, where travelers could sometimes see storms approaching hours before they arrived. Yet these open landscapes also carried dangers of their own. Strong winds, isolation, and changing weather could still create difficult conditions across otherwise smooth terrain. Mountain regions introduced another completely different rhythm of travel. Narrow rocky paths often forced caravans into slower movement, while steep elevation changes exhausted both travelers and animals carrying supplies. Air became colder at higher elevations, and weather conditions could shift rapidly. Snow, ice, and loose rock increased danger along certain routes, especially during difficult seasons. Travelers moving through these mountains needed caution because a single narrow path might run beside steep cliffs or unstable terrain. Traveling the Silk Road could feel like moving through several worlds connected by fragile routes. A caravan might leave a warm, dry desert and gradually enter cooler mountain valleys filled with streams and forests. Days later, the same travelers could emerge again into open plains beneath endless skies. Geography changed constantly, and travelers needed the ability to adapt to each new environment they encountered along the route. The pace of travel remained slow almost everywhere. Even under good conditions, caravans traveled gradually because animals carrying goods required rest, water, and careful management. Difficult terrain slowed movement even further. Deserts demanded caution, while mountain routes reduced speed naturally because steep paths became dangerous if travelers rushed carelessly. Progress along the Silk Road therefore unfolded steadily rather than quickly. Patience became one of the most valuable skills any traveler could possess. This slower rhythm changed the experience of distance. Modern transportation often makes geography feel smaller because movement happens so rapidly. Along the Silk Road, enormous landscapes unfolded over time. Travelers observed changing terrain gradually through repeated days of walking, riding, and resting. The transition from one environment to another became part of the journey rather than something passed quickly. Natural conditions shaped trade just as much as human decision-making did. Certain goods moved more easily across specific landscapes, while difficult terrain increased transportation challenges. A route crossing open plains might support larger caravans carrying greater quantities of material, while narrow mountain paths limited how much weight animals could safely transport. Geography therefore influenced not only travel, but also the movement of trade itself across the network. A useful comparison can be found in rivers flowing across a landscape. Water does not move randomly in straight lines across mountains and deserts. Instead, rivers adapt continuously to the terrain surrounding them. They curve around obstacles, follow valleys, and respond to gravity and elevation. Silk Road routes behave similarly. Human movement adjusted constantly to the shape of the land, while geography quietly directed the flow of trade and travel across enormous regions. Wind also influenced movement in subtle but powerful ways. Desert winds could blow sand across routes and reduce visibility, while cold mountain winds increased exhaustion during difficult climbs. Travelers often learned which seasons provided calmer conditions and safer passage through dangerous regions. Timing mattered because certain areas became significantly harder during extreme heat, heavy snow, or violent seasonal storms. Knowledge of climate and weather therefore became as important as knowledge of geography itself. The farther caravans traveled, the more preparation mattered. Supplies needed careful organization, because replacing missing resources could become impossible in isolated areas far from settlements. Animals carrying goods required food, water, and protection from difficult conditions. Travelers needed clothing suitable for both heat and cold, because the Silk Road crossed environments with enormous temperature differences. Every stage demanded planning tied to the landscape ahead. There is something deeply calming about imagining this slow relationship between travelers and the natural world. Movement depended entirely on observing terrain, weather, and distance carefully, rather than attempting to overpower them through speed or machinery. Travelers listened to the conditions around them, because survival required respect for the environment itself. Across deserts, plains, and mountains, the Silk Road unfolded gradually, through human adaptation, to the enormous landscape stretching across Asia and beyond. The Silk Road received its modern name from one of the most valuable and admired materials, moving across its enormous network of trade routes. Silk became famous because it combined qualities that seemed almost unusual for a fabric. It was smooth and lightweight, yet also remarkably strong for such a delicate material. Under sunlight, silk reflected a soft shimmering appearance, unlike rougher textiles made from wool or plant fibers. Travelers, merchants, and rulers gradually valued the material so highly that silk became closely associated with the routes carrying it across continents. What made silk especially fascinating was that such an elegant material began with something small and quiet. Silk originates from silkworms, small caterpillars that produce fine fibers while forming protective cocoons around themselves. These fibers are incredibly thin individually, yet when carefully gathered and woven together, they create a fabric both soft and durable. The contrast is striking. Delicate threads produced by tiny creatures eventually became one of the most desired trade materials in the ancient world. The production of silk required patience and careful attention at nearly every stage. Silkworms needed proper conditions and reliable food sources because their health directly influenced the quality of the fibers they produced. Mulberry leaves became especially important because silkworms depended heavily on them for nourishment. Entire systems developed around maintaining these creatures and protecting the process that produced silk thread. Modern people often think of fabric as something made quickly by machines. Silk production in the ancient world unfolded through a far slower rhythm connected closely to nature itself. The process depended on seasons, temperature, and the silkworm's life cycle. Workers observed small, gradual changes while managing living creatures rather than simply operating mechanical equipment. In many ways, silk production resembled careful farming combined with detailed craftsmanship. Once the silkworms formed their cocoons, the fine silk fibers needed to be gathered carefully without damaging their length and texture. This stage required skill because silk thread could tangle or break if handled roughly. Workers developed methods allowing them to unwind long, continuous fibers from the cocoons. The resulting thread appeared incredibly fine, yet thousands of these strands woven together eventually produced strong, flexible fabric suitable for clothing and trade. A useful comparison can be found in the process of spinning fine glass into modern fiber optic cables. Individual strands may appear thin and fragile alone, yet when produced carefully and used properly, they become part of systems capable of extraordinary performance. Silk functioned similarly in the ancient world. Tiny fibers produced by small caterpillars eventually became luxury fabrics, valued across long distances. The texture of silk strongly influenced its reputation. Compared with rougher fabrics common in many ancient regions, silk felt unusually smooth against the skin. It moved softly and reflected light with a gentle shine that made it visually distinctive. Clothing made from silk therefore became associated with wealth, status, and refinement in many cultures connected to long-distance trade. The material itself carried an appearance that immediately separated it from more common textiles. Its lightweight nature also made silk practical for trade across long distances. Heavy goods become difficult and expensive to transport because animals can carry only limited weight over difficult terrain. Silk provided high value without enormous bulk, allowing merchants to transport relatively compact quantities while still carrying materials considered extremely valuable in distant markets. This balance helped make silk especially important along the routes crossing Asia. Strength became another reason silk attracted attention. Despite its soft appearance, properly woven silk remained surprisingly durable. Travelers encountering silk for the first time may have found this combination unusual. Silk behaved differently. Its fibers created fabric that remained flexible while resisting tearing more effectively than many people expected. The careful processes behind silk production increased its value because creating the material required time, knowledge, and labor. Silk could not simply be gathered casually from nature in large quantities. Entire systems of cultivation, feeding, harvesting, and weaving supported its production. Regions possessing strong silk making traditions therefore gained important positions within larger trade networks because the knowledge itself became valuable. As silk traveled westward, many distant regions encountered the material long before understanding exactly how it was produced. The fabric became famous, while the detailed process behind it remained less widely known. This added to the sense of fascination surrounding silk, because the material seemed almost mysterious to people far removed from the regions where it originated. The movement of silk across continents demonstrates how one material can influence enormous systems of exchange and human connection. A fine thread produced quietly by small silkworms eventually traveled across deserts, mountains, and trading cities, carried by caravans moving steadily through changing landscapes. The material passed through countless hands while connecting distant societies separated by geography, language, and climate. There is something calming about the contrast at the center of this story. Tiny creatures producing delicate fibers eventually helped shape one of history's largest trade networks. Slow, patient work, carried out close to nature, became connected to long journeys crossing enormous regions of the ancient world. Silk itself reflected many qualities also found throughout the Silk Road: patience, careful process, gradual movement, and quiet endurance, unfolding steadily over long periods of time. Materials often shape human movement powerfully. Throughout history, useful or rare resources encouraged trade systems to develop around them. Salt, gold, spices, and precious stones all influenced the movement of travelers across difficult landscapes for centuries. Along the Silk Road, silk became a clear example of this link between material value and long-distance exchange. Demand for the fabric grew steadily across distant regions until trade networks expanded specifically to support its movement across continents. One reason silk became so influential was because people valued qualities that could not easily be replaced by other materials available at the time. Silk combined softness, strength, and visual beauty in ways that stood apart from rougher fabrics commonly used in many regions. It felt smooth against the skin, reflected light gently, and remained surprisingly durable despite its delicate appearance. Materials possessing unusual combinations of qualities often become highly desired because they offer experiences difficult to reproduce through simpler alternatives. Modern society still demonstrates this same pattern constantly. Certain materials used in electronics, medicine, or engineering become globally important because they possess properties difficult to replace. Rare metals, lightweight composites, and specialized materials influence modern trade routes, much like silk influenced ancient ones. Human beings organize movement around resources considered valuable, useful, or difficult to obtain locally. The Silk Road reflected this same pattern unfolding across the ancient world. Demand shaped the movement of goods along the routes. Merchants transported silk because distant markets valued it highly enough to justify the enormous difficulty of long-distance travel. A compact, valuable material became especially attractive for caravan trade. Silk fit these conditions extremely well. Compared with bulky, heavy goods, silk allowed merchants to carry relatively lightweight cargo while still transporting something considered luxurious and desirable in distant regions. Distance added to the value of many goods moving along the Silk Road. Materials produced far away often appeared more unusual and exotic to people living in distant markets. Silk arriving from Eastern Asia may have seemed mysterious and highly refined to buyers living thousands of miles westward, who had never seen the environments or production systems where the fabric originated. Distance can increase fascination because unfamiliar materials carry a sense of rarity. Long-distance trade required patience because movement unfolded gradually. Goods rarely traveled from one side of the Silk Road network to the other in a single uninterrupted journey. Instead, materials passed through many different settlements and trading groups over long periods of time. A bolt of silk might move through multiple caravans, languages, and landscapes before finally reaching a distant market. Trade became a chain of exchanges rather than one direct transaction between distant endpoints. In many ways, the movement of silk resembled the slow spread of water through connected river systems. A river rarely rushes instantly from mountain source to distant sea in one simple motion. Instead, water moves gradually through valleys, tributaries, and changing landscapes over long distances. Silk moved similarly across the ancient world. Caravans carried goods from one region to another, while trade routes linked together into larger networks spanning enormous geographic areas. Value strongly influenced which materials traveled farthest along the Silk Road. Heavy common goods often remained closer to local regions because transporting them across harsh terrain demanded enormous effort. More compact materials carrying higher value became better suited for long-distance trade. Silk, spices, fine textiles, and precious crafted goods therefore appeared frequently within caravan transport systems because their worth justified the challenges of moving them across difficult terrain. Value varied between cultures and regions. Materials considered ordinary in one location might become highly prized somewhere else depending on local resources, traditions, and availability. This difference created opportunities because merchants could carry goods towards stronger demand. The Silk Road therefore functioned partly through geographic differences in what people desired, produced, and lacked within their own environments. As silk continued moving westward through connected trade routes, its reputation expanded steadily. More regions became familiar with the material, while demand continued growing among wealthy buyers and ruling elites. Silk gradually became associated with refinement, status, and distant luxury because the fabric itself carried visible signs of careful craftsmanship and long-distance movement. Owning silk often reflected access to trade networks extending far beyond local communities. Trade also encouraged the movement of additional goods alongside silk itself. Merchants rarely traveled carrying only one material. Caravans transported spices, metals, textiles, ceramics, and many other products depending on regional demand and available resources. Once routes became established and reliable enough for long-distance movement, the network naturally expanded into broader systems of exchange, connecting many forms of trade together. The spread of silk across the ancient world demonstrates how one material can influence geography, economics, and human interaction simultaneously. Demand encouraged movement, while movement connected distant regions through steady exchange. Trade routes expanded because people continued seeking materials unavailable within their own local environments. Over time, silk became widely recognized because the fabric represented beauty, rarity, and connection across long distances. There is something remarkable about how slowly this process unfolded. No single caravan created the Silk Road network overnight. Instead, countless individual exchanges accumulated gradually across centuries of movement and trade. A material produced carefully from tiny silkworm fibers eventually crossed harsh terrain while shaping systems of human connection stretching across much of the ancient world. Silk became widely known because generation after generation continued carrying it patiently across the landscapes, linking distant societies together. The movement of goods along the Silk Road depended heavily on caravans. These were organized groups of travelers moving together across long distances through deserts, plains, and mountain regions. A lone traveler crossing such landscapes faced far greater danger. Caravans provided structure, shared resources, and safety across isolated terrain. Over time, caravan travel became a defining feature of the Silk Road network. Animals played a central role in this system because they carried supplies, trade goods, and equipment across environments too difficult for wheeled transport in many regions. Camels became especially valuable in desert areas because they could endure dry conditions more effectively than many other animals. Horses, mules, and donkeys also supported movement depending on terrain and regional conditions. These animals transformed travel by allowing larger quantities of goods to move steadily across long distances. A caravan often resembled a traveling community more than a simple line of merchants. Travelers shared responsibilities connected to food, navigation, water supplies, and animal care. Experienced guides understood difficult routes, while merchants managed trade goods packed carefully for long journeys. Workers prepared camps, watched over animals, and helped maintain movement through harsh environments. Every person contributed to the larger system supporting travel across isolated regions. Modern transportation can hide how physically demanding movement once was. Today, enormous cargo ships, trains, and aircraft move goods rapidly between continents using advanced navigation systems and mechanical power. Along the Silk Road, movement depended almost entirely on endurance, preparation, and the steady pace of animals carrying weight across natural terrain. Progress unfolded through footsteps, careful planning, and patience repeated day after day. Established paths mattered because geography controlled safe travel. Caravans did not wander randomly across deserts or mountains searching for direction. Travelers relied on routes tested through repeated use and accumulated experience. Certain paths became trusted because they connected reliable water sources, safer mountain passes, or settlements capable of supporting travelers with supplies and shelter. These routes behaved like narrow threads, connecting distant regions through difficult landscapes. In deserts, a known water source could determine the entire direction of travel, because surviving without water became nearly impossible across long stretches of dry terrain. In mountain regions, a single pass through steep rock formations might become one of the only practical routes available for caravans carrying heavy goods. Geography shaped the roads, while repeated human movement slowly reinforced them over generations. Travel usually happened in organized stages rather than one uninterrupted journey. Caravans often moved from one resting point to another while managing supplies carefully between locations. Certain settlements became important stopping places where travelers rested animals, exchanged information, and prepared for the next difficult section of the route. This staged movement helped caravans survive environments where continuous travel could become dangerous. A useful comparison can be found in long-distance sailing across the ocean during earlier periods of history. Ships crossing long distances often depended on islands and ports, where crews gathered supplies, repaired equipment, and rested before continuing onward. Silk Road caravans functioned similarly across land. Settlements and resting points became essential links within larger systems of movement connecting distant regions together. The pace remained slow because speed created risks. Animals carrying heavy supplies could become exhausted if pushed too aggressively through harsh environments. Heat, cold, and difficult terrain demanded careful energy management over long distances. Travelers therefore learned to value consistency rather than rapid movement. A caravan maintaining steady progress day after day often succeeded more reliably than one attempting to move too quickly across dangerous terrain. Organization became essential because caravans carried valuable goods across isolated areas where mistakes could become extremely costly. Supplies needed careful management, while routes required planning, connected to weather, water availability, and terrain conditions. Travelers prepared carefully because replacing lost equipment or missing supplies became difficult in remote regions. The sound of a caravan moving across the landscape would have created its own calm rhythm. Footsteps pressing steadily into sand and stone, harnesses shifting softly as animals carried goods across open ground, wind moving across plains and desert basins beneath wide skies, travelers speaking quietly while maintaining the long, steady pace required for survival. Movement along the Silk Road unfolded slowly through repetition and endurance rather than sudden speed. Caravans also helped spread knowledge because travelers carried information alongside trade goods. News about weather conditions, route safety, and distant settlements moved gradually between regions through repeated journeys. Experienced travelers learned which routes became safer during certain seasons and which landscapes demanded extra caution. Knowledge accumulated slowly through generations of movement across the same difficult environments. The Silk Road depended not only on trade, but on organized systems supporting long-distance movement. Caravans transformed isolated paths into functioning networks of exchange through cooperation, planning, and patience. Animals carried goods steadily through changing landscapes, while travelers adapted continuously to the natural world surrounding them. Across deserts, plains, and mountains, caravans became the moving lifeblood of the Silk Road network, connecting distant regions through steady travel. Long-distance travel along the Silk Road depended heavily on rest. Caravans could not move endlessly across deserts, plains, and mountains without stopping because both people and animals required recovery after difficult stages of travel. Rest stops allowed travelers to restore energy, organize supplies, and prepare for the next section of the journey. Without these pauses, the long distances separating regions would have become far more dangerous and exhausting. A caravan moving steadily across difficult terrain resembled a living system that needed constant balance between movement and recovery. Animals carrying goods required food, water, and protection from exhaustion, while travelers needed sleep, shelter, and time to repair damaged equipment. Every stage demanded attention because small problems could become serious far from major settlements. Modern transportation can create the illusion that movement continues almost endlessly through machinery and fuel. Along the Silk Road, however, movement remained deeply connected to the physical limits of living creatures. Camels, horses, and travelers all experience fatigue, thirst, and changing weather conditions. The pace of travel therefore followed the rhythms of endurance rather than the speed of machines. Caravans succeeded not by rushing, but by managing energy carefully over long distances. Rest stops appeared in many different forms, depending on geography and available resources. Some developed near reliable water sources, where travelers could refill supplies and allow animals to recover after crossing dry regions. Others formed near trading settlements, where merchants exchanged goods and gathered information about conditions farther ahead along the route. Certain stopping places became especially important because they connected difficult sections of travel through otherwise harsh environments. In desert regions, water shaped nearly every movement decision. A reliable well or oasis could determine where caravans stopped and how routes developed over time. Travelers learned which locations offered dependable water during difficult seasons and which areas became dangerous due to scarcity. These resting points behaved almost like islands across a sea of dry terrain, where survival depended on careful planning and knowledge passed between experienced travelers. Managing resources became one of the most important responsibilities during long journeys. Food supplies needed organization because replacing missing resources could become impossible in isolated regions, far from settlements. Water required especially careful attention in deserts, where dehydration posed constant danger. Animals carrying goods also consumed large quantities of food and water, increasing the complexity of planning for long stages of travel across difficult landscapes. A useful comparison can be found in modern space missions, where crews manage limited supplies far from immediate support. Every resource matters because replacing missing materials becomes difficult once the mission begins. Silk Road caravans faced similar realities across the landscapes of Asia. Travelers calculated supplies carefully because survival depended on preparation rather than convenience. Organization helped caravans maintain steady movement despite the enormous scale of the routes. Goods needed secure packing, while animals required regular care. Travelers likely followed routines connected to setting camp, preparing meals, and managing departures each morning before continuing onward. Repeated systems reduced confusion and helped large groups function more efficiently during exhausting journeys lasting months or longer. The movement of caravans often resembled a steady pulse flowing across the landscape. One group arrived at a settlement, while another departed toward distant regions farther along the route. Goods moved gradually between resting points through countless stages of exchange and transport. The Silk Road functioned less like a fixed road and more like ongoing motion connecting distant regions. Endurance defined Silk Road movement. Travelers crossing these routes accepted that the journey itself would require long periods of patience and physical effort. Progress unfolded through repeated days of walking, riding, and resting beneath changing skies. A caravan might spend weeks crossing one difficult region before reaching safer terrain farther ahead. This slower rhythm shaped how people experienced the world around them. Travelers observed landscapes gradually because movement happened at the pace of animals and human endurance rather than mechanical speed. Mountains rose slowly on distant horizons, while desert basins stretched across repeated days of travel. Settlements appeared after long, quiet stages of movement through open terrain. Distance became something deeply felt through time and effort rather than something measured only on maps. Caravans also depended heavily on cooperation because isolated travelers faced greater risks from harsh conditions and uncertainty. Groups shared labor, connected to animal care, camp preparation and navigation, while experienced guides helped maintain safe movement through difficult environments. Organization transformed individual travelers into a group capable of surviving difficult landscapes. There is something calming about imagining these repeated cycles of movement and rest unfolding steadily across the ancient world. Caravans arriving quietly at evening settlements after long days beneath open skies. Animals drinking water after difficult desert crossings. Travelers preparing simple meals while exchanging information about weather, routes, and distant regions. Then slowly, after rest and preparation, movement beginning again with the steady rhythm of footsteps continuing across the landscapes linking Asia and beyond. The Silk Road endured for long periods because these organized systems of travel supported continuous movement across enormous geographic distances. Rest stops, resource management, and careful planning allowed caravans to function reliably despite deserts, mountains, and changing conditions. Through patience, endurance, and repeated cooperation, travelers transformed difficult landscapes into connected networks of exchange, carrying goods, knowledge, and human movement steadily across the ancient world. Some of the most difficult sections crossed deserts where survival depended on preparation, patience, and environmental knowledge. These landscapes could appear endless beneath open skies with little shade, limited water, and distant settlements. Travelers faced conditions where mistakes became dangerous quickly. The desert was never simply empty land between destinations. It actively shaped the pace, direction, and difficulty of travel across the Silk Road. Water became the most important resource in many desert environments. Without reliable water, people and animals weakened rapidly beneath heat and dry air. Caravans therefore planned routes carefully around wells, springs, and oasis settlements capable of supporting movement through otherwise harsh terrain. A trusted water source could determine the success or failure of an entire journey. Travelers respected these locations because survival often depended on reaching them with enough supplies remaining. Modern people with constant running water can forget how completely life depends upon it. In desert regions along the Silk Road, travelers experience this reality directly every single day. Water influenced how far caravans could travel, where they rested, and which routes became practical across long stretches of dry terrain. Geography and survival remained closely connected because conditions controlled movement. The deserts themselves varied widely across different parts of the Silk Road network. Some regions contained enormous fields of sand, shaped continuously by wind, while others consisted of rocky, dry basins where little vegetation survived. Certain desert landscapes appeared almost motionless beneath the sun, while strong winds in other regions constantly shifted sand across routes and campsites. Travelers needed knowledge of local conditions because each environment presented different challenges despite sharing the same broad reality of dryness and limited resources. Temperature extremes added difficulty. During the day, desert heat could become exhausting beneath direct sunlight, with little natural shade available across open terrain. Yet after sunset, temperatures often drop dramatically because dry desert air loses heat quickly during the night. Travelers needed preparation for both heat and cold within the same landscape. Clothing, shelter, and timing all became important parts of surviving these changing conditions. A useful comparison can be found in modern mountaineering, where climbers prepare for rapid environmental changes. Conditions can shift from warm sunlight to dangerous cold within short periods of time, depending on elevation and weather. Desert travelers faced similar contrasts because the environment itself behaved in ways that demanded constant adaptation and awareness. Wind shaped desert travel continuously. Strong desert winds could reduce visibility by lifting sand into the air while gradually covering paths and campsites beneath drifting dunes. Fine sand entered clothing, supplies, and equipment, while making long periods of movement physically exhausting. Travelers often learned which seasons brought calmer conditions and which times of year increased the danger of violent desert storms crossing open terrain. The slow pace reflected these harsh realities. Movement through deserts required caution because rushing increased exhaustion and wasted valuable resources. Animals carrying goods needed careful management, while travelers balanced distance against remaining water supplies and physical endurance. A caravan surviving a difficult desert crossing succeeded through consistency and planning rather than speed. The desert also changed how travelers experienced silence and distance. Large open landscapes stretched toward distant horizons with few visible landmarks beyond dunes, rocky formations, or occasional vegetation near water sources. Days of travel might pass beneath enormous skies where the rhythm of footsteps and shifting wind became the dominant sound surrounding the caravan. Isolation became part of the psychological experience of moving through these environments. Despite these dangers, caravans continued crossing desert regions because the Silk Road connected valuable systems of trade between distant societies. Travelers accepted difficult conditions because movement across these landscapes allowed goods, knowledge, and communication to flow steadily between regions separated by enormous geographic barriers. The deserts became obstacles, yet also important links within the larger network of movement stretching across Asia. Knowledge passed between generations helped make this travel possible. Experienced guides understood where water could be found, which routes remained safest during difficult seasons, and how weather patterns influenced movement across certain areas. This understanding became as valuable as supplies because survival often depended on decisions made before danger became visible. There is something almost timeless about imagining caravans moving carefully through these desert regions beneath changing light and endless skies. Long lines of travelers progressing steadily across sand and stone while protecting water supplies and watching distant horizons for signs of the next resting point. The desert demanded humility because human movement there depended completely on respecting the natural world rather than attempting to overpower it. The Silk Road endured partly because travelers learned how to adapt to these difficult environments rather than avoiding them entirely. Water management, route knowledge, and careful preparation allowed caravans to survive landscapes that at first glance might seem impossible to cross regularly. Across deserts stretching through Central Asia and beyond, human endurance and environmental understanding combined slowly over centuries to create pathways of movement linking distant regions through the harsh beauty of the desert world. Desert movement along the Silk Road was shaped constantly by sand and wind. These forces influence visibility, travel speed, route stability, and the condition of travelers and animals. A desert may appear still from a distance, yet the environment was often in quiet motion. Wind gradually shifted sand across the landscape, while caravans adapted continuously to changing conditions beneath open skies. Travelers learned that survival required understanding these natural forces over time. Sand created difficulties far beyond simply walking across loose ground. Fine grains entered clothing, food supplies, and equipment, while strong winds pushed dust through campsites and resting areas. Moving through soft sand demanded greater effort because people and animals lost energy faster than on firm terrain. A heavily loaded caravan crossing dunes under intense heat faced constant exhaustion, as every step required additional effort against unstable ground. Wind could transform the desert environment rapidly, Calm conditions sometimes shifted into powerful storms, carrying large amounts of sand across open regions. Visibility dropped, while familiar paths became difficult to follow, beneath drifting dunes and blowing dust. Travelers caught in severe desert storms often needed to stop movement entirely until conditions improved, because continuing blindly across dangerous terrain increased the risk of losing direction or exhausting supplies unnecessarily. Modern people still experience similar environmental challenges during severe snowstorms or heavy fog, where visibility decreases and navigation becomes difficult. Desert storms created comparable dangers across the Silk Road. Travelers depended on experience, caution, and patience, because the environment itself could suddenly disrupt movement through forces completely beyond human control. Preparation became the foundation of survival in these regions. Caravans planned carefully before crossing long desert sections, because once movement began, correcting mistakes became far more difficult. Water supplies, food storage, and route knowledge all required attention long before the first steps across the desert. Travelers understood that preparation was not separate from the journey itself. It was part of survival. Animals carrying goods also needed protection from harsh desert conditions. Camels became especially important because their bodies handled dry environments more effectively than many other animals commonly used for transport. Even so, caravans still needed to manage food, water, and rest carefully, because exhaustion weakened both animals and travelers during long, difficult crossings. A caravan moved only as successfully as its ability to preserve endurance over time. The environment directly shaped movement speed in desert regions. Caravans could not simply choose any pace they wished. Heat, terrain, and available resources controlled progress constantly. During especially hot conditions, movement sometimes slowed because excessive heat increased exhaustion and dehydration risk. Difficult sand terrain reduced speed naturally, while travelers balanced distance against the need to preserve energy and supplies for the days ahead. This slower pace created a different relationship with distance than modern transportation does today. Crossing a desert along the Silk Road might require many repeated days of careful movement beneath changing skies, with little variation in scenery beyond dunes, rocky ground, and distant horizons. Travelers experience geography physically through effort, temperature, and time, rather than rapid mechanical travel. Distance became something deeply felt through the body itself. Routes often evolved according to environmental conditions rather than direct straight-line movement. Caravans followed paths connecting water sources, firmer ground, and safer travel conditions whenever possible. In many areas, wind and shifting sand gradually altered sections of the landscape over time, forcing travelers to adapt routes according to changing conditions. The desert remained active rather than fixed, and movement adjusted continuously in response. Modern ocean navigation offers a useful comparison. Ships crossing open water rarely travel in perfectly straight lines because currents, storms, and changing conditions influence the safest routes. Silk Road caravans behaved similarly within the desert world. Wind, terrain, and water availability shaped movement constantly, while travelers adapted to the natural forces surrounding them. The psychological experience of desert travel also mattered. Long stretches of similar landscape combined with heat, dryness, and isolation could become mentally exhausting during extended journeys. Travelers needed discipline and patience because progress sometimes appeared slow despite continuous movement. A distant resting point might remain visible for hours while caravans crossed difficult terrain beneath the sun. Yet despite these harsh conditions, movement along the Silk Road continued steadily for centuries. Caravans adapted because trade, communication and exchange connected distant regions through these routes. Human beings survived difficult environments by studying nature and adjusting movement to its rhythms and limits. There is something calming about the image of caravans moving steadily through shifting desert landscapes beneath the sound of wind crossing open sand. Travelers watching the horizon carefully while protecting supplies and following paths known through generations of repeated movement. The journey demanded patience because the environment allowed no shortcuts. Every mile required endurance, preparation, and respect for the natural world surrounding the route. The deserts of the Silk Road became more than obstacles between distant cities. They shaped the character of travel itself. Sand, wind, and harsh conditions influenced every stage of movement, while teaching travelers the importance of caution, planning, and adaptation. Across these immense dry landscapes, human survival depended on learning how to move with the environment rather than struggling against it. Mountain regions created some of the most demanding sections of Silk Road travel. After crossing open plains or dry desert basins, caravans sometimes face steep climbs into narrow passes winding through rocky high terrain beneath colder skies. These mountains shaped movement completely because elevation, weather, and terrain forced travelers to adapt constantly to difficult conditions. Progress slowed while every stage demanded caution and endurance. Elevation changed the environment as caravans climbed higher. Air often became colder and thinner, while weather shifted more rapidly than it did across lower landscapes. Travelers moving upward through valleys and steep paths experienced changing temperatures even within the same day. Warm sunlight at lower elevations could gradually give way to cold winds and snow farther above. The mountains created environments where conditions transformed quickly across relatively short distances. The paths themselves often became extremely narrow. In certain regions, caravans traveled along routes carved gradually through steep rock formations, where only limited space existed between cliffs and sharp drops into valleys below. Animals carrying goods needed careful guidance because a single misstep on unstable terrain could become dangerous. Movement through these areas required patience because large groups could not simply spread outward freely across the landscape the way they sometimes could on open plains. Modern mountain roads still show how strongly geography controls movement. Even with advanced engineering and machinery, roads often curve carefully around cliffs, follow valleys, and pass through narrow gaps where travel becomes possible. Along the Silk Road, travelers worked within these same natural limitations, using only animals, human endurance, and accumulated route knowledge passed between generations. Weather strongly influenced mountain movement. Snow, rain, and cold winds could slow caravans dramatically, or force travelers to stop entirely while waiting for conditions to improve. High elevations sometimes experienced sudden storms that reduced visibility and made steep paths more dangerous. Travelers therefore paid close attention to seasonal patterns because certain routes became significantly safer during specific times of year. The mountains also shaped sound and silence differently from the deserts. Wind moved through rocky valleys, while footsteps echoed against stone surfaces during narrow climbs. Water from melting snow sometimes flowed through streams, cutting across steep terrain. Travelers passing through these regions experienced landscapes that felt enclosed and vertical compared with the wide open horizons of desert and plain environments farther below. Animals faced greater strain in the mountains because climbing required more energy than flat travel. Caravans often slowed considerably while ascending difficult passes, especially when paths narrowed or became uneven. Travelers needed to balance the weight carried by each animal carefully, because overloaded supplies increased exhaustion and danger on steep routes. Modern backpacking offers a useful comparison, because distance alone does not determine difficulty. A short, steep climb at high elevation can require far more energy than a much longer walk across flat ground. Silk Road caravans experienced this same reality continuously. Mountains changed the physical meaning of movement itself. Certain mountain passes became important because geography limited practical routes through large ranges. A single pass connecting valleys could influence regional trade patterns for long periods of time, because caravans depended on these natural openings within otherwise difficult terrain. Control over important passes sometimes carried economic and political significance, because movement through the mountains concentrated naturally into specific corridors. Travelers adapted through experience and preparation. Clothing suitable for colder temperatures became important, while supplies needed organization capable of surviving difficult weather and slower progress. Experienced guides understood which paths remained safest during certain seasons and where caravans could find shelter or water within high terrain. Knowledge became as important as physical endurance, because surviving the mountains depended heavily on making careful decisions. The mountains also created mental challenges. Narrow paths, steep drops, and changing weather demanded constant attention, while slower movement extended travel times across already long distances. Travelers needed patience because difficult terrain could make even short sections of the route feel long and exhausting. Yet despite these hardships, caravans continued crossing mountain regions because the Silk Road connected valuable systems of exchange stretching across Asia and beyond. In some ways, the mountains acted almost like natural gates controlling movement between different worlds. Travelers leaving one valley gradually entered another region with different climates, languages, and landscapes after crossing high passes shaped by stone, snow, and wind. Geography separated communities, while the Silk Road slowly connected them again through repeated movement across difficult terrain. There is something calming about imagining caravans winding carefully through these mountain routes beneath cold skies and distant peaks, animals moving steadily along narrow paths, while travelers watch the weather and guide supplies across difficult climbs. Progress unfolding slowly through patience and caution rather than speed. The mountains demanded respect because no traveler could force rapid movement through such terrain without accepting greater risk. The Silk Road endured partly because people learned how to adapt to these environments instead of avoiding them entirely. High elevation routes, narrow passes, and harsh weather became part of the larger rhythm of long-distance travel, connecting distant regions together. Across mountains stretching through Central Asia and beyond, caravans continued moving patiently through the difficult beauty of the high-terrain world. Mountain travel along the Silk Road depended heavily on natural passes. These openings allowed caravans to pass through difficult terrain without impossible climbs across rocky barriers. Repeated movement concentrated into these passages because geography limited safe travel. The mountains shaped direction quietly but powerfully, guiding caravans through specific corridors connecting valleys, plateaus, and distant regions across Asia. A natural mountain pass often became more important than its appearance suggested. To travelers crossing enormous regions, a reliable pass could mean the difference between safe movement and dangerous isolation. Some passes followed valleys carved slowly by water over thousands of years, while others wound between towering rock formations shaped by ancient geological forces. Human trade routes adapted to these features rather than forcing entirely new paths through the mountains. Modern transportation still reflects this same relationship between geography and movement. Railways, highways, and tunnels often follow valleys and lower elevation corridors because steep terrain increases construction difficulty and danger. Even aircraft routes sometimes avoid severe weather and high mountain turbulence whenever possible. Along the Silk Road, travelers face these environmental realities directly because the terrain itself controlled how movement unfolded across the region. Direction along the Silk Road was rarely straight. A traveler might appear to move away from a destination temporarily because the safest available paths curve through valleys or around difficult terrain. Geography shaped travel in indirect ways that modern maps can sometimes make difficult to appreciate fully. Caravans followed routes determined by survival and practicality rather than simple shortest distance calculations. The mountains naturally slowed movement. Narrow rocky paths prevented large caravans from moving quickly, while steep climbs exhausted both animals and travelers carrying heavy supplies. Loose stones, uneven surfaces, and changing weather demanded careful attention at every stage of the journey. Even under favorable conditions, mountain routes often required far more time and energy than travel across flatter terrain. A useful comparison can be found in rivers crossing mountainous landscapes. Water rarely moves in straight lines through steep regions. Instead, rivers curve around rock formations, descend gradually through valleys, and follow paths shaped by the terrain itself. Silk Road caravans behaved similarly. Human movement adapted continuously to the shape of the land, while mountain geography quietly directed the flow of trade and travel. The terrain also affected communication between regions. Difficult mountain barriers slowed not only the movement of goods, but also the spread of information and ideas. Certain valleys and settlements remained relatively isolated, while major passes became important points of contact, connecting distant areas together. Geography therefore influenced cultural exchange just as strongly as it influenced physical movement. Travelers learned to observe mountain landscapes carefully because survival depended on awareness. Changes in weather, loose terrain, or signs of unstable paths could influence whether movement remained safe. Experienced guides recognized subtle features within the environment that helped caravans navigate difficult terrain more effectively. Knowledge of the mountains accumulated gradually through repeated journeys over many generations. The pace of caravans reflected this need for caution. Travelers could not rush carelessly through narrow passes, carrying valuable goods and limited supplies. A damaged load, injured animal, or blocked route could create serious problems far from major settlements. Steady, controlled movement therefore became far more important than speed. Caravans survived the mountains through patience and organization rather than force. Certain mountain settlements developed near important passes. Travelers stopped there to rest, exchange information, and prepare for difficult crossings ahead. These locations sometimes became valuable centers of trade because movement naturally concentrated through the surrounding terrain. Geography shaped not only routes, but also the growth of communities connected to long-distance travel. Weather could change quickly in the mountains, adding uncertainty. A clear path one day might become dangerous after snowfall, heavy rain, or sudden cold winds. Travelers therefore adapted routes and timing according to seasonal patterns. Certain passes remained safer during specific months, while others became too dangerous during harsh weather periods. The mountains demanded flexibility because environmental conditions constantly influenced what routes remained practical. There is something almost humbling about how completely the terrain controlled travel along these routes. Modern roads and machinery sometimes create the impression that human movement can overpower geography easily. Along the Silk Road, travelers understood that the landscape itself remained in control. Mountains allowed movement only through certain passages, while weather and terrain determined the pace of travel across high regions. The Silk Road therefore became deeply connected to the natural structure of the land itself. Trade routes formed not through straight lines imposed upon the environment, but through gradual adaptation to mountains, valleys, and passes already present across the landscape. Caravans moved where geography permitted movement, and over centuries these repeated journeys transformed difficult terrain into connected pathways, linking distant regions together. There is a calm rhythm hidden within this slow relationship between travelers and the mountains. Caravans winding steadily through valleys beneath cold skies, while rocky passes guide movement from one region into another. Footsteps echoing softly against stone, while distant peaks rise above the route. Progress unfolding gradually through terrain, shaped over immense stretches of geological time, long before the first travelers ever crossed these high mountain paths. The Silk Road carried more than silk alone. Across its network, travelers transported goods shaped by the resources, climates, and skills of their regions. Spices, textiles, metals, ceramics, paper, and crafted objects moved steadily between distant societies through steady exchange over long periods of time. Each material reflected the landscape and culture from which it came, turning trade itself into a gradual movement of regional identity across continents. Different regions produced different resources according to geography and environment. Areas with fertile farmland supported agriculture and plant-based materials, while mountain regions often supplied metals and minerals gathered from rocky terrain. Forested landscapes provided wood and natural products, while dry climates influenced the types of crops and materials people could produce successfully. The Silk Road connected these varied environments together through systems of movement, allowing goods from one region to appear thousands of miles away in completely different landscapes. Spices became especially valuable because they were lightweight, aromatic, and difficult to obtain in many distant regions. Even small quantities carried strong flavors and scents capable of transforming food and preserving certain ingredients. Travelers transported spices carefully, because their value justified the difficulty of long-distance movement across harsh terrain. In many markets, spices represented luxury and connection to distant places beyond the local world, familiar to most people. Textiles also moved widely across the Silk Road network. Different societies developed unique weaving traditions, fabrics and decorative styles shaped by local materials and craftsmanship. Wool, cotton, linen and silk each reflected different environments and production systems. A piece of cloth could therefore carry evidence of climate, agriculture, and artistic tradition from the region where it was created. Trade allowed these materials to spread gradually between societies, separated by long distances. Metals traveled along many sections of the Silk Road as well. Iron, copper, silver, and other materials supported tool-making, decoration, and craftsmanship across connected regions. Certain areas possessed greater access to mineral resources, while others specialized more heavily in shaping and refining finished goods. Trade linked these systems together by moving raw materials and crafted products through steady exchange between distant communities. Modern global trade still follows many of these principles. Different regions specialize in certain materials or industries depending on geography, resources, and historical development. Products move internationally because no single region contains every resource or skill needed for all forms of production. The Silk Road represented an earlier version of this interconnected system, unfolding gradually across the ancient world through caravans and long-distance trade routes. Goods moving along the Silk Road carried more than practical value. Materials also communicated ideas about status, craftsmanship, and distant cultures. A finely woven textile or carefully crafted object might represent not only wealth, but also connection to remote regions unfamiliar to local communities. Trade, therefore, influenced imagination as much as economics, because travelers and merchants introduced foreign materials, carrying visible signs of distant worlds. Exchange connected areas that might otherwise remain isolated. A settlement surrounded by mountains or deserts could still encounter goods originating thousands of miles away through the slow movement of caravans across the Silk Road network. Trade created links between environments that looked completely different from one another. Materials produced in warm, fertile valleys eventually reached cold mountain regions, while crafted objects from western cities traveled gradually toward eastern markets. Modern internet communication offers a useful comparison, though it moves information almost instantly. The Silk Road achieved something broadly similar through physical trade, though at a far slower pace. Goods carried pieces of distant societies from one region into another, while exchange gradually expanded awareness of the larger world beyond local landscapes. The value of many traded materials depended partly on rarity. Goods difficult to produce or transport often became more highly desired because limited supply increased demand in distant markets. A spice growing naturally in one climate could become extremely valuable far away, where local conditions made production impossible. Geography therefore shaped trade, not only by controlling movement, but also by influencing what resources existed in different regions. Trade routes became systems of specialization. Certain regions gained reputations for particular products, while merchants developed knowledge about where valuable materials could be obtained most reliably. Travelers crossing the Silk Road therefore carried mental maps shaped not only by geography, but also by resources and craftsmanship associated with different areas. The movement of goods also encouraged interaction between people from different backgrounds. Merchants, guides, craftsmen and travelers exchanged information while conducting trade across settlements and caravan stops. Materials connected distant societies physically, while repeated interaction gradually connected them culturally as well. There is something calming about imagining this slow movement of objects across the ancient world. Spices packed carefully into caravan supplies, while textiles folded gently against desert dust and mountain cold. Metals shaped in one landscape eventually carried toward another, far beyond the horizon. Goods traveling patiently through valleys, deserts and plains, while connecting distant human communities, gradually over centuries of movement. The Silk Road became one of history's great networks of exchange because it allowed specialized materials from many different environments to move gradually between distant regions. Geography shaped resources, while trade shaped connection. Through caravans crossing enormous landscapes, goods reflected the diversity of the natural world itself, while linking societies together through steady exchange across Asia and beyond. Trade along the Silk Road did more than move goods between distant places. Over long periods of time, repeated exchange gradually encouraged interaction between people, settlements, and entire regions that otherwise might remain separated by geography and distance. Caravans carrying silk, spices, and metals also carried conversations, observations, and experiences gathered from many different landscapes. Through this steady movement, the Silk Road slowly became a system connecting human societies across large portions of the ancient world. Interaction developed wherever travelers stopped to rest, exchange goods, or prepare for difficult stages ahead. Merchants arriving from distant regions shared information about routes, weather conditions, and markets, while local communities provided food, water, and shelter, supporting continued travel. These repeated encounters created relationships between people who lived in different environments and followed different cultural traditions. Exchange therefore became social, as well as economic. The movement of goods influenced culture in subtle ways over long stretches of time. Materials arriving from distant regions introduced unfamiliar textures, flavors, clothing styles, and artistic ideas into local communities. A spice from one region might gradually influence cooking traditions somewhere far away, while decorative patterns carried through textiles inspired new forms of design and craftsmanship in distant settlements. Trade quietly expanded the range of materials and ideas people encountered in their daily lives. Modern society still experiences similar cultural influence through global exchange. Foods, music, fashion, and technology spread internationally through systems of trade and communication, connecting distant regions together. The Silk Road functioned in much the same way across the ancient world, though movement unfolded far more slowly through caravans crossing harsh terrain over many generations. Regions linked by trade gradually became connected through repeated dependence on exchange. A settlement located near an important caravan route might grow steadily because travelers required supplies, shelter, and opportunities to trade goods. Communities producing valuable resources developed economic importance, while caravan routes encouraged the growth of supporting networks across surrounding landscapes. Geography shaped these connections while repeated movement strengthened them over time. The Silk Road behaved less like a fixed road and more like a developing system shaped by human activity. Routes expanded, shifted, and adapted according to changing conditions, while settlements rose in importance through repeated interaction with travelers and merchants. Some areas became major centers of exchange, connecting multiple routes together, while smaller communities supported movement through isolated regions. Over centuries, these systems grew increasingly interconnected. A useful comparison can be found in the growth of plant roots beneath the ground. A root system spreads gradually through soil, while connecting different areas into one larger network, supporting movement of water and nutrients throughout the plant. The Silk Road developed similarly across Asia. Repeated journeys slowly formed networks, linking distant regions together through continuous exchange and interaction. Trade shaped history because connected societies influenced one another over time. Movement along the Silk Road allowed technologies, agricultural knowledge, and artistic traditions to spread gradually between regions. Even though travel remained slow, repeated exchange created long-term effects, reaching far beyond simple economic activity. Human societies changed, partly because interaction exposed people to unfamiliar ideas and materials carried across the network. Systems supporting trade became more organized across generations. Travelers developed reliable routes, while settlements adapted to the needs of caravans crossing difficult terrain. Knowledge about geography, climate, and seasonal conditions accumulated gradually through repeated journeys. Trade networks therefore became more stable over time, because experience improved the systems supporting long-distance movement. Distance still limited interaction compared with modern communication. Information traveled only as quickly as caravans moved across the landscape, meaning news and ideas often spread slowly between distant regions. Yet despite this slow pace, the Silk Road still created remarkable levels of connection across enormous geographic spaces. Patience and repetition allowed exchange to continue steadily over centuries. The movement of culture through trade often happened quietly rather than dramatically. A traveler describing a distant city around an evening fire. A craftsman studying unfamiliar decorative patterns on imported textiles. A merchant learning new languages gradually while crossing multiple regions. These small interactions accumulated slowly until larger cultural connections formed between societies separated by mountains, deserts, and thousands of miles. The Silk Road revealed how strongly people seek connection beyond local environments. Despite difficult terrain, harsh weather, and long travel times, people continued crossing long distances because exchange offered opportunities, knowledge, and access to valuable materials unavailable within their own regions. Geography created barriers, yet human movement repeatedly attempted to bridge them through trade and communication. There is something calming about imagining these slow layers of interaction unfolding across the ancient world. Caravans arriving quietly at settlements while goods change hands beneath open skies. Travelers exchanging stories about distant mountains, deserts, and cities while preparing for the next stage of the journey. New ideas spreading gradually between regions through repeated human contact, carried patiently across the landscape. The Silk Road shaped history not through sudden moments of transformation, but through continuous exchange unfolding over long periods of time. Trade supported interaction, while movement connected distant regions into larger systems of communication and exchange. Across Asia and beyond, goods and ideas traveled steadily through the same caravan networks, linking landscapes, settlements, and human societies together through centuries of gradual connection. Travel along the Silk Road required patience because journeys unfolded at the slow pace of caravans, weather, and geography. Modern transportation allows people to cross continents in hours, yet along the Silk Road movement often required months and sometimes even years, depending on the route, conditions, and final destination. Travelers accepted from the beginning that progress would happen gradually through repeated stages of movement rather than rapid, uninterrupted travel across the landscape. Distance along the Silk Road was experienced physically. Every mile demanded effort from people and animals carrying supplies through deserts, mountain passes, and open plains. A traveler moving westward across Asia might spend weeks crossing one difficult region before even reaching the next major settlement. The journey became a long process shaped by weather, terrain, rest stops, and resource management. Travel unfolded slowly because the environment allowed no shortcuts. Journeys rarely happened in one continuous motion from beginning to end. Instead, movement occurred in stages as caravans traveled between settlements, resting points, and trading centers spread across the larger network. Goods often changed hands many times before reaching distant markets. One caravan might transport materials through desert terrain, while another continued the route across mountain regions farther ahead. The Silk Road therefore behaved more like a chain of connected movement rather than one direct road crossing the continent. Modern shipping systems still operate through similar stages, though transportation is now much faster. A product traveling internationally may pass through ships, trains, trucks, and distribution centers before finally reaching its destination. The Silk Road functioned through a slower version of this same principle. Different groups handled different portions of movement depending on geography, expertise, and regional trade systems. The slow pace of travel influenced how people understood the world around them. Travelers crossing the Silk Road spent long periods observing changing landscapes, climates, and settlements through direct experience rather than passing rapidly through them. Days of movement gradually revealed distant mountain ranges, while desert horizons shifted slowly beneath changing light. Geography unfolded through time and physical endurance rather than quick mechanical travel. Patience mattered because rushing increased danger. Animals carrying goods required steady management, while supplies needed careful preservation over long distances. Travelers crossing difficult terrain learned that consistent progress mattered far more than sudden speed. A caravan maintaining reliable movement day after day often succeeded more safely than one attempting aggressive travel through harsh conditions. The length of these journeys also created mental challenges. Travelers sometimes spent months far from familiar communities while crossing isolated regions beneath unfamiliar climates and landscapes. Communication with distant home regions remained extremely limited because information traveled only as fast as caravans themselves could move. Long-distance travel therefore demanded mental endurance as well as physical preparation. A useful comparison can be found in long ocean voyages during earlier centuries of exploration. Sailors crossing oceans accepted that movement would unfold gradually through changing weather and difficult conditions over long stretches of time. Silk Road travelers experienced similar realities across land. The journey itself became a major part of life, rather than a short interruption between destinations. Seasonal conditions influenced travel timing. Certain mountain passes became safer during warmer months, while desert crossings often required careful planning around heat and water availability. Travelers adapted movement according to environmental rhythms because geography and climate controlled what routes remained practical throughout the year. Waiting for better conditions sometimes became necessary before continuing onward through difficult terrain. The transfer of goods reflected this gradual rhythm. Materials moving across the Silk Road might spend long periods stored in settlements, while merchants organized the next stage of transport. Trade flowed continuously, yet slowly compared with modern expectations. A single bolt of silk or shipment of spices could pass through many hands and many landscapes before reaching distant markets far beyond its place of origin. This slower pace changed how people valued goods as well. Materials transported across long distances carried visible signs of effort, rarity, and endurance, because everyone understood the challenges involved in moving them through such difficult environments. Distance increased value, partly because long travel required so much time, labor, and organization. The steady rhythm of caravan travel also created predictable patterns across the Silk Road network. Settlements learned when travelers typically arrived during certain seasons, while merchants prepared for recurring waves of movement through major routes. Over centuries, these repeated cycles helped stabilize trade systems despite the enormous geographic challenges surrounding them. There is something calming about imagining this slow pace of movement across the ancient world. Caravans advancing steadily beneath changing skies, while weeks gradually become months through repeated travel across harsh terrain. Travelers waking each morning to continue onward, gradually through landscapes stretching toward distant horizons. Progress measured through endurance and patience rather than speed. The Silk Road endured because people accepted this slower rhythm of travel and adapted to it carefully. Journeys lasting months or years became possible through organized stages of movement, connecting settlements and caravan routes across long distances. Through steady progress, repeated generation after generation, travelers transformed difficult geography into one of history's greatest systems of long-distance connection and exchange. The Silk Road was never fixed or permanent. Over long stretches of history, routes changed gradually as travelers adapted to weather, politics, geography, and shifting patterns of trade. Certain paths became heavily used during one period, while quieter alternatives gained importance later, depending on safety, environmental conditions, and economic demand. The Silk Road therefore behaved less like a single stable road, and more like a living network, continuously adjusting to the changing world around it. Geography remained constant in many ways, yet the way people moved through that geography evolved over time. A mountain pass considered reliable during one century might later become more dangerous due to conflict, weather changes, or declining support from nearby settlements. Desert routes also shifted as water availability changed, or caravans discovered safer paths connecting reliable resting points. Travelers learned to remain flexible because successful movement depended on adapting to changing conditions rather than following one route blindly forever. Modern transportation systems still behave similarly, even with advanced technology. Shipping lanes, airline routes, and trade corridors change according to economics, weather, and political stability. Roads may become more important when cities expand, while older routes decline as conditions change elsewhere. The Silk Road experienced the same constant process of adjustment, unfolding much more slowly across centuries of human movement. Trade itself influenced which routes became active. A region producing highly valued goods might attract more caravan movement, while settlements located near useful paths gradually grew into larger centers of exchange. If demand shifted toward different materials or regions, movement patterns adjusted accordingly. Trade routes therefore reflected the changing priorities of the societies connected by the Silk Road network. Flexibility became one of the system's strengths. Because the Silk Road consisted of many connected routes, rather than one single road, travelers often possessed alternative options when conditions became difficult. A blocked mountain pass, dangerous political situation, or severe desert season could encourage caravans to choose different pathways farther north or south. This adaptability helped the larger network survive, despite the enormous environmental and geographic challenges surrounding it. A useful comparison can be found in the branching structure of rivers flowing across large landscapes. Water naturally adjusts around obstacles, while creating new channels when conditions shift over time. The Silk Road evolved in a similar way. Human movement adapted continuously to geography, weather, and changing circumstances, while maintaining larger systems of connection across Asia and beyond. Environmental conditions strongly influence these changes. Severe winters, droughts, or difficult storms could temporarily alter travel patterns, while safer seasons encouraged increased movement through certain regions. Travelers passed knowledge about route conditions between caravans and settlements, allowing the network to respond gradually to changing environments. Information therefore became as important as physical goods, because survival often depended on understanding current conditions ahead along the route. Political changes also shaped movement. Regions experiencing stability and organized protection often attracted greater trade activity because merchants preferred safer routes where caravans faced lower risks during long journeys. In contrast, unstable conditions sometimes reduced travel through certain areas while encouraging movement along alternative paths. The Silk Road therefore reflected the political realities of the societies connected by it. Over centuries, some settlements grew wealthy because of their position within these evolving systems of exchange. Locations near important crossroads, mountain passes, or desert resting points became valuable centers supporting trade and movement. Yet even these places could rise or decline depending on how routes shifted over time. The Silk Road constantly changed because movement itself never remained completely static. The network's evolution reveals how strongly human systems depend on adaptation. Travelers crossing harsh terrain could not force the environment to remain stable forever. Instead, they learned how to respond to changing conditions through flexibility, observation, and repeated experience. This willingness to adjust allowed trade and communication to continue even when routes transformed over time. Ideas followed these changing pathways as well. New routes exposed travelers to different settlements, languages, and cultural traditions, while shifting patterns of exchange connected regions in new ways. The Silk Road therefore influenced not only trade, but also the gradual evolution of human interaction across large portions of the ancient world. There is something calming about imagining this slow changing network unfolding across centuries beneath the same mountains, deserts, and skies. Caravans choosing safer valleys during difficult seasons, while older paths fade into the landscape. New settlements rising near active routes, while travelers adapt patiently to changing conditions around them. The Silk Road survived because it remained flexible enough to move with history rather than resist it. The Silk Road became one of history's most enduring systems of exchange, precisely because it could evolve over time. Routes shifted, adapted, and expanded, while geography, weather, and human societies continued changing around them. Through flexibility and repeated movement, the network remained alive across centuries of travel and trade, connecting distant regions through the steady flow of people, goods, and ideas across Asia and beyond. Settlements became essential points of support within the Silk Road network. Without these communities, long-distance movement through deserts and isolated plains would have become far more difficult and dangerous. Travelers needed places where they could rest, gather supplies, care for animals, and exchange information before continuing onward through the next stage of the journey. Over time, many settlements developed specifically because the Silk Road brought steady movement and trade through otherwise harsh environments. Oasis towns became especially important in desert regions, where reliable water remained scarce across long stretches of dry terrain. These settlements often formed around springs, underground water systems, or fertile areas that could support agriculture. To travelers crossing exhausting landscapes beneath intense heat, an oasis settlement could feel almost remarkable after days of movement through open sand and stone. Water, shade, and vegetation transform these locations into lifelines, supporting continued travel across difficult environments. The contrast between oasis towns and desert-shaped Silk Road travel strongly. A caravan might spend many days moving through dry, isolated terrain beneath endless skies before finally reaching a settlement filled with trees, water, and human activity. The appearance of such places on the horizon often marked relief, safety, and temporary recovery after long, difficult stages of the journey. Modern highways rely on similar support systems. Fuel stations, hotels, and service areas provide resources allowing travelers to continue across large distances safely and efficiently. Silk Road settlements served many of the same practical purposes, though movement happened at the slower pace of caravans rather than modern vehicles. Travelers depended on these communities because survival across enormous regions required regular access to supplies and shelter. Settlements supporting trade often became highly organized because caravans arrived carrying valuable goods and information from distant regions. Merchants exchanged products, while travelers gathered knowledge about route conditions, weather, and political situations farther ahead along the network. Skilled workers repaired equipment, prepared food, and cared for animals, supporting continued movement across the surrounding landscape. These towns therefore became active centers of exchange, rather than simple resting places alone. Many settlements grew because of the Silk Road itself. Communities positioned near reliable water sources, mountain passes, or major route intersections naturally attracted more travelers over time. Increased movement encouraged trade, while trade supported economic growth and local stability. Geography therefore influenced where towns developed, while caravan movements strengthened their importance within the larger network. A useful comparison can be found in ports along major coastlines during periods of maritime trade. Ships crossing oceans required places where crews could rest, repair equipment, and exchange cargo before continuing onward. Silk Road oasis towns functioned similarly across land. They became islands of support connected by long, difficult routes stretching between distant regions. Life within these settlements likely reflected cultures and influences carried through repeated travel. Merchants, guides, and travelers arriving from different regions brought languages, clothing styles, foods, and ideas into communities positioned along major routes. Certain towns therefore became places where people encountered unfamiliar customs and materials from far beyond their own local environment. Agriculture helped sustain these communities. Water from springs, rivers, or underground channels allowed crops to grow in otherwise difficult landscapes, supporting both local populations and passing caravans. Date palms, grains, fruits, and vegetables helped sustain travelers while creating more stable food supplies within the settlements themselves. In desert regions especially, successful agriculture represented careful adaptation to harsh environmental conditions. The pace of life in these towns probably followed the rhythm of caravan movement. Certain seasons brought increased travel, while quieter periods reduced activity across the routes. Caravans arriving after long journeys filled markets and resting areas with movement, conversation, and trade. Then gradually, after rest and preparation, travelers departed once again toward distant regions farther along the network. Settlement support systems helped caravans survive journeys lasting months or years. Animals needed food and recovery, while merchants organized supplies carefully before crossing the next difficult section of terrain. Information exchange between travelers also became valuable because route conditions changed constantly depending on weather, political stability, and environmental factors. Knowledge moved alongside trade goods through the same systems of exchange. There is something calming about imagining these oasis communities appearing quietly across the Silk Road world. Trees rising above desert edges while water reflects sunlight beneath open skies. Caravans arriving slowly after long days of travel, while animals rest and travelers gather food, shelter, and conversation before continuing onward. Settlements creating small pockets of life and connection within vast landscapes shaped by distance and isolation. The Silk Road depended on these communities because movement across enormous regions required reliable systems of support. Oasis towns and caravan settlements transformed harsh geography into connected pathways of trade and communication through organization, agriculture, and repeated human cooperation. Across harsh terrain, these settlements became steady resting points within the steady flow of travelers and goods moving through the ancient world. Water systems were among the most important foundations supporting life and travel along the Silk Road. Across many regions, especially deserts and dry valleys, communities survived only because people learned how to locate, store, and manage limited water supplies carefully. Without these systems, caravans crossing long distances would struggle to find reliable places for rest and recovery. Water-shaped settlement patterns, farming, and trade itself, because movement across difficult environments depended completely on access to this essential resource. Many Silk Road communities developed near rivers, springs, or underground water sources capable of supporting both local populations and passing travelers. In dry regions, even small reliable supplies of water could transform the surrounding landscape dramatically. Areas near water often supported trees, crops, and animal life, while the terrain beyond remained dry and difficult. Travelers crossing harsh desert environments therefore relied heavily on settlements positioned around dependable water systems. Farming near trade routes became possible because communities adapted carefully to local environmental conditions. People learned how to guide water toward fields, protect crops from dry climates, and use limited resources efficiently. Irrigation channels, wells, and underground water systems help sustain agriculture in areas that might otherwise appear too harsh for reliable farming. These agricultural systems supported local economies, while also helping feed caravans moving steadily across the Silk Road network. Modern cities still depend on organized water systems many people rarely think about. Reservoirs, pipes, and treatment systems quietly support daily life by moving water where it is needed most. Silk Road communities face the same challenge in a much more direct way. Survival required constant attention to water because there were no large mechanical systems capable of replacing careful environmental management. Growing food near trade routes helped settlements become more stable. Caravans required grain, fruits, vegetables, and supplies for both travelers and animals, carrying goods across long distances. Communities capable of producing reliable food supplies naturally became valuable stopping points within the larger network of exchange. Agriculture and trade therefore supported one another closely along many sections of the Silk Road. Different environments required different adaptations. In desert regions, water conservation became especially important because rainfall remained limited and evaporation occurred quickly beneath intense heat. Mountain valleys sometimes provided streams from melting snow, while fertile plains supported larger-scale farming more easily than harsh, dry terrain. Silk Road communities survived, partly because people adjusted their methods according to the realities of local geography and climate. A useful comparison can be found in modern greenhouse farming located in difficult climates. Farmers create controlled systems capable of supporting crops despite environmental challenges surrounding them. Silk Road communities developed similar forms of adaptation using the knowledge and tools available to them. Human survival depended on understanding how to work with local environmental conditions rather than attempting to ignore them completely. Local economies formed around travelers and goods moving through these settlements. Farmers supplied food, while craftsmen repaired equipment and merchants exchanged materials arriving from distant regions. Animal care, shelter, and transportation support all became important parts of community life near major trade routes. The Silk Road therefore encouraged the growth of interconnected local economies, shaped by the needs of long-distance travel. Caravans and settlements supported one another. Travelers depended on communities for resources and recovery, while towns benefited from the trade and activity brought by repeated movement along the routes. This steady exchange helped many settlements survive in regions where isolation might otherwise limit economic growth and stability. Seasonal conditions continued influencing daily life across these communities. Farming cycles followed climate patterns, while caravan activity often increased during safer travel periods. Water availability also changed, depending on rainfall, snowmelt, and seasonal weather conditions. Settlements therefore adapted not only to geography itself, but also to the changing rhythms of the natural world throughout the year. The slow pace of Silk Road movement allowed these local systems to develop gradually over long periods of time. Trade did not arrive suddenly in overwhelming waves. Instead, caravans moved steadily through the network, while communities adjusted gradually to support growing patterns of exchange and travel. Over generations, settlements evolved into stable parts of the larger Silk Road world. There is something calming about imagining these communities surviving carefully within difficult landscapes through patience and environmental understanding. Water flowing quietly through irrigation channels, while fields grow beside caravan routes crossing the desert beyond. Travelers arriving after long journeys to settlements shaped by careful farming and resource management beneath open skies. Human life adapting steadily to harsh environments through observation, cooperation, and repeated effort. The Silk Road endured because people learned how to sustain movement through regions that often appeared difficult or unforgiving at first glance. Water systems, farming, and local economies transformed isolated settlements into reliable centers of support, connecting distant regions together. Across deserts, valleys, and mountain landscapes, communities adapted patiently to the environment while helping maintain one of history's greatest networks of long-distance exchange and human connection. The Silk Road carried more than physical goods across harsh terrain. Alongside silk, spices, and metals, travelers also transported ideas, knowledge, languages, and beliefs between distant regions over long periods of time. Every caravan became part of a larger communication system, linking societies separated by geography and climate. Trade routes therefore connected minds as well as markets through the steady movement of people and conversation across the ancient world. Travelers exchanged information whenever caravans stopped at settlements or trading centers. Merchants discussed route conditions, weather patterns, and distant regions, while guides shared knowledge about geography and safe passage through difficult terrain. Stories, customs, and practical skills moved gradually between cultures because human interaction happened continuously wherever trade created opportunities for repeated contact. Language played an important role in this exchange. Travelers crossing large portions of the Silk Road often encountered many different languages and forms of communication along their journeys. Merchants and guides likely learned key phrases or developed methods of trade communication, allowing exchange between groups from different regions. Over time, important trade settlements probably became places where multiple languages could be heard within the same markets and caravan resting areas. Modern airports and shipping ports create similar places where people from different regions interact through trade and travel. The Silk Road functioned in much the same way across the ancient world, though movement unfolded at a far slower pace through caravans and long-distance journeys lasting months or years. Human contact gradually expanded because the routes repeatedly brought distant communities into connection with one another. Knowledge moved steadily through these interactions. Travelers carried observations about geography, farming, craftsmanship, and technology between regions connected by trade. A useful technique learned in one area could slowly spread farther across the network through repeated conversation and movement. Information traveled only as fast as caravans themselves, yet over centuries, even slow exchange created powerful long-term influence between societies. Beliefs and philosophies also spread through travelers, teachers, and communities near major routes. People moving between regions naturally carried their traditions and worldviews with them, while interacting with unfamiliar cultures encountered along the journey. Certain settlements became important centers where ideas from different regions met and mixed over time. A useful comparison can be found in the spread of seeds carried by wind or flowing water across large landscapes. Plants slowly expand into new regions because movement distributes life beyond its original source. Ideas moved similarly along the Silk Road. Human travel carried knowledge and beliefs outward through repeated contact until cultural influence spread across long distances over many generations. The slow pace of Silk Road travel may actually have strengthened these exchanges in certain ways. Travelers spent long periods together crossing difficult terrain, resting at settlements, and preparing for the next stages of the journey. Conversations unfolded gradually across weeks and months, rather than through quick, brief encounters. This slower rhythm allowed deeper familiarity between people from different regions, sharing the same caravan routes and resting places. Trade settlements became centers of cultural interaction because many travelers passed through them. Markets filled not only with goods, but also with different clothing styles, foods, artistic traditions, and forms of communication. Communities located along major routes therefore experienced broader cultural influence than more isolated regions separated from long-distance travel networks. Knowledge about the environment itself also spread through the Silk Road system. Travelers learned which routes remained safest during difficult seasons, where water could be found in desert regions, and how weather patterns shaped movement across mountains and plains. Survival depended on this accumulated understanding of geography and climate, making practical environmental knowledge extremely valuable. The exchange of ideas often happened quietly. A merchant learning unfamiliar words from another traveler during a long desert crossing. A craftsman observing new decorative styles carried through textiles and trade goods. A guide describing distant landscapes beyond the mountains ahead. These small interactions accumulated slowly until broader cultural connections formed between regions separated by thousands of miles. The Silk Road revealed how strongly human beings seek understanding beyond their immediate surroundings. Despite difficult geography and slow movement, people continued crossing long distances while remaining curious about unfamiliar regions and cultures encountered along the way. Trade created opportunities for exchange, yet human curiosity helped deepen those connections into lasting cultural influence. There is something calming about imagining this slow movement of ideas beneath open skies and across changing landscapes. Travelers sitting beside evening fires near caravan camps while sharing stories about distant cities, harsh terrain, languages blending softly within busy market settlements, while knowledge passes gradually from one person to another. Human understanding expanding gradually through repeated journeys across the ancient world. The Silk Road became one of history's great pathways of cultural exchange, because travelers always carried more than physical goods alone. Languages, beliefs, skills and ideas moved steadily alongside caravans crossing Asia and beyond. Through patience, conversation, and continuous human interaction, the network connected distant societies not only through trade, but through the gradual sharing of knowledge and experience across centuries of exchange. As ideas moved along the Silk Road, technologies traveled with them. Over long stretches of time, repeated exchange between distant regions allowed practical knowledge to spread gradually across mountains, deserts, and plains. Travelers carried more than trade goods packed onto animals and wagons. They also carried methods of farming, craftsmanship, navigation, writing and construction, learned from the societies connected through the network. The Silk Road therefore became one of history's great systems for the slow movement of human innovation. Technologies rarely spread instantly. Instead, knowledge traveled gradually through repeated contact between merchants, craftsmen, travelers, and settlements positioned along trade routes. A useful tool or production method observed in one region might gradually appear farther away after years of exchange. This process unfolded slowly compared with modern communication, yet over centuries, the cumulative effect became enormous. Paper provides a strong example of how practical inventions could influence distant societies once knowledge began spreading through connected trade networks. A material that improved writing and record keeping naturally became valuable because communication, trade, and administration all depended heavily on storing information. As techniques for producing paper traveled gradually across regions linked by the Silk Road, the invention helped reshape learning, trade, and cultural exchange far beyond its original place of development. Modern society sees similar patterns whenever useful technologies spread internationally. New communication systems, engineering methods, or medical tools gradually appear across multiple countries because people exchange information through trade and interaction. The Silk Road functioned as an earlier version of this same process. Human contact allowed practical ideas to move steadily outward through steady exchange between distant societies. Craftsmanship also evolved through cultural blending. Artists and skilled workers encountered unfamiliar decorative patterns, materials, and production techniques carried through trade goods arriving from distant regions. Over time, local traditions sometimes absorbed outside influence, while still maintaining their own regional identity. This gradual blending created new forms of artistic expression, shaped by interaction between cultures connected through the network. Food and agriculture changed as well. Crops suited to one climate occasionally spread into new regions, where environmental conditions allowed successful cultivation. Cooking traditions adapted gradually as spices, ingredients, and agricultural knowledge traveled between settlements and trade centers. The movement of food and farming techniques therefore became another quiet form of cultural influence carried along the Silk Road routes. A useful comparison can be found in rivers joining together as they flow across large landscapes. Water from different regions gradually mixes while still carrying traces of its original source. Cultural influence along the Silk Road behaved similarly. Ideas and traditions blended over time, while societies continued maintaining their own local identities within the larger network of exchange. The spread of technology often depended on direct observation and human teaching, rather than written instruction alone. A craftsman might learn a new technique by watching another worker carefully during time spent in a trade settlement. Travelers exchanged practical knowledge during long journeys, while merchants introduced unfamiliar materials into distant markets. Learning unfolded through repeated human interaction across generations of movement. The Silk Road also helped civilizations become more connected through awareness of distant regions beyond their immediate surroundings. Trade encouraged curiosity because people encountered unfamiliar goods, languages, and technologies arriving from places they might never personally visit. Over time, this exchange expanded understanding of the larger world, while gradually linking societies through systems of communication and interaction. Some regions became important crossroads where multiple trade routes connected. These locations often experienced stronger cultural blending as travelers from different backgrounds passed through regularly. Languages mixed, while artistic styles, technologies, and traditions influenced one another within active centers of trade and movement. The slow pace of Silk Road exchange meant cultural influence unfolded gradually. A decorative style might spread over generations, while technological knowledge expanded gradually through repeated contact between travelers and settlements. Yet despite this slow rhythm, the long-term influence remained powerful because the network continued operating across centuries of exchange. The Silk Road demonstrated that human civilizations rarely develop in complete isolation. Geography creates separation through deserts, mountains, and distance, yet trade and travel slowly reconnect distant societies over time. Goods move first, followed by ideas, technologies, and cultural influence carried through repeated interaction between people crossing the same routes, generation after generation. There is something calming about imagining this slow blending of knowledge across the ancient world. Craftsmen studying unfamiliar materials brought by caravans arriving from beyond the horizon. Travelers describing distant inventions beside evening fires after long journeys through mountain passes and desert plains. New ideas spreading quietly from settlement to settlement, while cultures adapt gradually through contact and curiosity. The Silk Road helped shape connected civilizations because it encouraged continuous exchange across enormous geographic distances. Technologies, artistic traditions, and practical knowledge traveled steadily through caravan networks linking Asia and beyond. Through patience, observation, and repeated human interaction, the movement of ideas gradually transformed societies while creating one of history's most important systems of cultural connection and shared development. Looking across the Silk Road's long history, the network depended on many connected systems working together. Geography shaped movement, while trade encouraged travel across difficult landscapes. Caravans carried goods steadily through harsh terrain, while settlements supported survival across long distances. Cultural exchange unfolded alongside economic exchange as travelers transported ideas together with physical materials. The Silk Road endured because all of these elements remained connected through centuries of repeated human movement across the ancient world. Geography formed the foundation of the entire system. Deserts, plains, valleys, and mountain ranges determined where safe movement could happen and how quickly caravans could travel through different environments. Water sources shaped settlement locations, while narrow mountain passes guided routes through otherwise difficult terrain. Travelers adapted continuously to the natural world because the environment controlled nearly every stage of the journey. The deserts revealed how strongly survival depended on preparation and environmental understanding. Water management, route knowledge, and careful pacing became essential for crossing dry landscapes where mistakes could become dangerous quickly. Wind, heat, and shifting sand slowed movement, while caravans relied heavily on oasis settlements scattered across isolated terrain. The desert demanded patience because no traveler could force rapid movement through such conditions without increasing risk. Mountain regions introduced completely different challenges. Steep paths, cold weather, and high elevations slowed caravans, while narrow passes concentrated movement into specific routes through the terrain. Travelers crossing these regions required endurance, organization, and local knowledge capable of guiding caravans safely through difficult landscapes shaped by stone, snow, and changing weather. Geography remained in control because the mountains allowed passage only through certain corridors. Modern transportation can create the illusion that people have escaped geography's limits. Aircraft cross mountain ranges in hours while highways cut through difficult terrain using powerful machinery and engineering systems. The Silk Road reveals an older relationship with the natural world, where movement remained fully connected to weather, terrain, and physical endurance. Travelers succeeded by adapting to the environment rather than attempting to overpower it entirely. Trade provided the motivation connecting these difficult journeys together. Silk, spices, textiles, metals, and many other materials moved gradually between distant regions because people valued resources unavailable within their own local environments. Demand encouraged caravans to continue crossing enormous landscapes despite the challenges created by geography and distance. The movement of goods therefore became the force linking distant societies into larger systems of exchange. Caravans transformed these trade routes into functioning networks through organization and cooperation. Travelers moved together because survival across harsh terrain often depended on shared resources, local knowledge, and coordinated movement. Animals carried supplies steadily, while guides navigated difficult terrain, and settlements provided opportunities for rest and recovery. Every successful journey reflected careful preparation and repeated adaptation to changing conditions. The circulatory system of a living body offers a useful comparison. Blood moves slowly through connected pathways, carrying nutrients and energy throughout the entire organism. The Silk Road functioned in a remarkably similar way across Asia and beyond. Goods, information, and cultural influence flowed gradually through connected routes, while settlements acted like vital resting points, supporting continued movement throughout the larger network. Human endurance remained one of the defining forces behind the entire Silk Road system. Travelers accepted journeys lasting months or years because movement unfolded at the slow pace of caravans crossing natural terrain. Every stage required physical effort, patience, and emotional resilience, while geography continuously tested the limits of both people and animals, carrying goods through difficult environments. Yet despite these hardships, the Silk Road also encouraged cultural connection and exchange between distant societies. Travelers carried languages, beliefs, technologies, and artistic ideas alongside trade goods moving through the network. Repeated contact gradually linked communities separated by deserts, mountains, and enormous geographic distances. Trade therefore shaped human understanding as much as economics, because movement exposed people to unfamiliar regions and cultures beyond their local world. The slow rhythm of the Silk Road may actually have strengthened these interactions in certain ways. Travelers spent long periods together, crossing difficult landscapes, while settlements became places where conversations, observations, and experiences accumulated over time. Exchange unfolded patiently through repeated human contact rather than rapid communication systems. Relationships formed through endurance, cooperation, and shared dependence on the routes connecting distant regions. The Silk Road also demonstrated how strongly human systems depend on flexibility. Routes shifted according to weather, politics, and environmental conditions, while caravans adapted movement continuously to geography and changing circumstances. The network survived for centuries because it remained capable of evolving gradually instead of remaining fixed and rigid across the landscape. There is something calming about imagining this immense connected system unfolding slowly beneath the skies of the ancient world. Caravans crossing deserts while mountain passes guide movement toward distant valleys and settlements. Travelers sharing knowledge beside evening fires after long days of movement across changing terrain. Goods and ideas flowing steadily through routes shaped by geography and sustained by patience and human endurance. The Silk Road became one of history's greatest networks of exchange because geography, trade, movement, and cultural interaction all supported one another continuously over long periods of time. Deserts, mountains, and plains created challenges, while caravans and settlements transformed those landscapes into pathways of connection, linking distant civilizations together. Through endurance, adaptation, and repeated human movement, the Silk Road slowly connected large portions of the ancient world into one vast system of trade, communication, and cultural exchange, stretching across Asia and beyond. The Silk Road was never just a road. It was a vast living network shaped by geography, trade, survival, and human curiosity across enormous stretches of time. Deserts, mountains, valleys, and plains all influenced the direction of movement, while caravans carried goods steadily between distant societies, separated by thousands of miles. Through repeated journeys unfolding over centuries, the Silk Road slowly connected large portions of the ancient world through systems of exchange stretching across Asia and beyond. Everything within this network depended on gradual movement. Travelers crossed harsh landscapes at the pace of animals, weather, and physical endurance rather than mechanical speed. A journey that modern transportation might complete in hours often required months of careful travel beneath changing skies and difficult environmental conditions. The slow rhythm of caravan movement shaped every aspect of the Silk Road experience, because geography remained fully in control of the journey itself. Deserts revealed the importance of carefully. Water sources determined where movement could happen, while caravans adapted carefully to heat, wind, and shifting sand across isolated terrain. Oasis settlements became lifelines supporting survival in environments where mistakes could become dangerous quickly. The desert taught travelers humility because success depended completely on respecting the natural world rather than attempting to overpower it. Mountains introduced another form of endurance. Narrow passes guided caravans through steep rocky terrain, while weather and elevation slowed movement naturally. Travelers crossing these regions relied on organization, experience, and careful pacing because difficult paths demanded constant attention. Geography shaped the routes, while repeated human movement gradually transformed dangerous terrain into connected pathways of trade. The Silk Road also depended on settlements along the routes. Oasis towns, valleys, and trading communities provided food, water, shelter, and information supporting continued travel across long distances. These settlements became centers of interaction where travelers exchanged goods, stories, and practical knowledge gathered from distant regions. Trade encouraged growth, while geography determined where communities could survive successfully along the larger network. Modern global systems still reflect many of the same principles. Different regions produce different resources, while transportation networks connect distant societies through exchange and communication. Goods continue moving internationally because geography, climate, and local specialization shape what materials exist in different parts of the world. The Silk Road represented an earlier form of this interconnected human system, unfolding through caravans and long-distance trade routes. Yet the Silk Road carried far more than physical goods alone. Ideas, languages, beliefs, and technologies also traveled gradually between regions through repeated human contact. Travelers crossing harsh terrain shared observations about distant landscapes, while craftsmen encountered unfamiliar artistic styles and production methods arriving through trade. Over long periods of time, this exchange helped shape connected civilizations across much of the ancient world. The movement of culture happened slowly and quietly. A merchant learning unfamiliar words in a crowded trade settlement. A traveler describing distant mountains beside an evening fire after weeks of movement through the desert. A craftsman studying decorative patterns woven into imported textiles from faraway regions. These small interactions accumulated gradually over centuries, until societies separated by geography became increasingly connected through shared systems of exchange and communication. The Silk Road also demonstrated the remarkable adaptability of human beings. Travelers learned how to survive difficult climates, organize long journeys, and build support systems across landscapes that at first glance might appear impossible to cross regularly. Caravans adjusted to changing weather and shifting routes, while settlements adapted farming and water systems to harsh environmental conditions. Human survival depended on observation, cooperation, and flexibility rather than force alone. The roots of a great tree offer a useful comparison. Individual roots move quietly through soil while connecting distant sections into one larger living system, carrying water and nutrients throughout the entire structure. The Silk Road behaved similarly across Asia and beyond. Trade routes linked distant regions together, while movement carried goods and ideas gradually throughout the connected world. The network survived for centuries because it remained flexible. Routes shifted according to geography, politics, and environmental conditions, while travelers adapted continuously to the changing realities surrounding them. The Silk Road endured not because it remained fixed, but because it evolved gradually through repeated human exchange over long periods of time. There is something deeply calming about imagining the steady rhythm of life along these ancient routes. Caravans moving slowly beneath enormous skies, while mountains rise beyond the horizon and desert winds cross the open landscape. Travelers resting beside oasis water after long, difficult journeys, while distant goods and ideas continue moving patiently between civilizations. Human connection, unfolding gradually through footsteps, endurance and curiosity across the ancient world. Even today, the Silk Road's legacy remains visible in the exchange of goods, culture, and knowledge across large distances. Modern systems move faster, yet the underlying desire for connection remains similar. People still seek unfamiliar materials, new ideas, and communication with distant regions beyond their own local world. The Silk Road revealed how deeply human civilization depends on exchange across geography and time. Thank you for listening to the Sleepy Mind channel. I hope you enjoyed learning about the Silk Road and the slow-moving world of caravans, deserts, mountains, and long-distance trade.